Yeah, and then we will head right into the next topic. And I welcome Joe Roberts from the UK, who will talk about the wilderness well-being and the concept of how we can increase our well-being in wilderness.
Hi, can you hear me?
Hello, yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah, I'm shouting a long way across the oceans. Thank you very much for having the Wilderness Foundation on and for having me come and speak. I'm hoping my slides will emerge, so I've just got some help because I'm better in wilderness than I am online. I just wanted to thank the other speakers that I've been listening to. I think it's very much part of mental health and well-being is when we listen to what's actually happening around the environment. And certainly this talk is very much around those two issues being joined together. So if I just try and go straight into sharing my screen, I'm just going to get my presentation up. Can you all see that slide?
Yes, we can see the slide, but not yet in full screen. So maybe try.
So let me just get it. That's it. Is that it? I'll be good?
Yeah, perfect. All right. Take it away.
Thank you for the help I've been given. Thank you to all of you listening as well. I think that this talk is really around the therapy of being in nature from a variety of angles. But I think I wanted to make very clear that I think that it's about the well-being of nature and the well-being of people very much as a joined concept. And that actually, if we're looking at human well-being, I think that there are many factors around the state of the environment that are leading to this. And I'd like to try and propose this deeper connection of people and nature as potentially one of the only ways forward to really create a sustainable planet for all living creatures. So the Wilderness Foundation as an organization has tried very much to see mental health and well-being of humans as part of mental health and well-being of the planet as well. And I have a very strong feeling and belief that actually a lot of what's going on with our mental health is directly related to almost a concept of detachment disorder. You know, often we've talked about attachment disorder from childhood of children growing up with some psychological distress because the attachments that were so needed for their well-being were somehow severed with their parents. And I have a similar philosophy that much of our mental ill health at the moment is linked to the distress and detachment that we have from the natural world around us, even though I think in some ways people don't realize it. So this talk will very much look at what I believe are the factors leading to our mental ill health. I think we have a pandemic of mental health issues across the world. It's not just in the UK or in Europe or the States, it's everywhere. And I think it's an increasing problem. And I'll look at some of the costs that are now being attached to mental health across the world as well. I think that what I'm also going to try and do is look at some of the science that is evolving around this work. So it doesn't simply sit on a narrative that we're just telling wonderful stories, because those of us who connected to wilderness and are lucky enough to spend time in it will know how it makes us feel, and we'll know how it's made our children, our friends feel. So we understand the qualitative side of it. But for government, for decision makers, and for others, very often we have to show that there is a scientific back to what we propose about this essential and critical need for people to connect to wilderness. So, you know, this is kind of the depressing bit, and hopefully we'll cheer up a little bit more, but we are facing some major issues across the world. We have this ginormous population growth. We have an incredibly high increase in people on technology. We talk about at the Wilderness Foundation about learning to disconnect, to reconnect. We have massive issues around climate change and biodiversity. And of course, we have this growing problem around mental health and dis-ease. So for all of us, we are on this program because we really care about the earth and we care about each other. We are in trouble from a biodiversity point of view. From a human point of view, we're also in trouble. We have an increasing urban community. We have very high numbers of people who now live in cities. We know that people who are poor are going to be more adversely affected by climate change, and very often they have the smallest voices in solutions. And we know that children today are growing up very much disconnected from nature. And I think for my European colleagues, and I see myself as a European, I just want to make that statement. I think for many of my European colleagues, I've learned a lot from you, because working in Poland and Slovakia and up in the mountains above the Ukraine, I've understood that many of the communities still have a connection to nature. I think the UK still has a connection to nature, but I think as a small island, we have more extreme disconnection than I think some of your communities have had. Although as the world rolls on fast, I think that many of your countries and our countries are going to steamroller faster and faster into a nature deficit as we become more urbanized, more detached from nature, and we spend a lot more time indoors. So for example, just looking at this American study, there's a really uncomfortable statistic there of how little time people are spending outside. And it's much easier sometimes to be indoors if people haven't got the satisfaction, the pleasure, and the knowledge of how being outside in an icy wind and having the wind blowing our hair and having a cold nose can feel. You would much rather stay tucked up under your duvet watching TV. So the statistics in the UK are pretty unpleasant. If we look at what happens with children and how much time they're spending online, how much time they're watching television. And these are quite old statistics. This is work done by the National Trust in 2012. And those statistics have increased dramatically as time is going by. This is not something that's going backwards, it's something that's escalating. And at the bottom of the slide, I've just put in just some of the environmental issues that are going on that we're facing here. I mean, can we actually comprehend that Britain has lost 97% of its wildlife meadows, that we've got 40 million birds less than we had in 1966? That Britain is actually sitting right down at the bottom of the world average of biodiversity. And is there something more we could be thinking and really trying to find the connections between our mental dis-ease and the dis-ease of what is happening on the planet around us? I personally believe that there's scope for some significant research into these correlates so that we can actually start to see that our existence and our very survival for life is actually linked into the very existence and survival of the natural world. So as you can see, one of my favorite authors, Richard Louv, who wrote this extraordinary book called Last Child in the Woods, it's now quite old. He said, for a new generation, nature is more an abstraction than a reality. Increasingly, nature is something to watch, to consume, to wear, and to ignore. And apart from all of that, we've now got COVID. We're now dealing with a global pandemic that has actually created some really significant social problems, one of which I was just reading some literature and research yesterday on the growth of loneliness. And we are experiencing a real loneliness of spirit as human beings. I notice now when I watch a television program, how closely people are, how they kiss each other, how they touch. We are a social, biologically programmed animal to live in close connection with other human beings. And that pro-social biology makes our living under COVID restrictions extremely difficult and extremely hard to manage. Because we need touch, we need hug, and we need connection. And we are not getting that from each other at the moment. In fact, we're looking at each other with sometimes fear and suspicion. And that cannot be good for our hearts, our minds, and our souls. So pre-COVID, we already had in the UK significant mental health issues. The cost of mental health in the country in 2018, so we're looking 2 years ago, was already £94 billion per year. If we actually look at us becoming advocates for the protection of the natural world, we have some significant work to do, in my belief, around this idea of cost-benefit analysis And really, I'm not a person to promote ecosystem services, although I see the essential need sometimes to have economic values attached to things. But I do think that from time to time, we need to dip into the financial modeling to be able to make people see sense. And it's only one strand of our advocacy for the wild, but I think it's quite an important one. Post-COVID, this is a report by Mind in August in 2020. Mind is a large mental health charity here, was that more than half of adults and over 2/3 of young people said their mental health had deteriorated in these 6 months of COVID. Restrictions on seeing people to go outside and worries about the health and family of friends are driving poor mental health. And boredom is a major problem. So what we're also seeing here is high levels of alcohol and drug increases and gaming addictions across the country. And so when we really look at where we are, if we had to look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which we teach all of our young people, at the moment, we're kind of hanging out somewhere near the bottom. We're on a survival for the future. We're trying to worry about whether people are going to die or live. And the things that we really need to take us to the higher levels of existence, like love and belonging and esteem and self-actualization, are there, but they're not the main focus. For me, a belief in connection to the natural world and a care of it is actually, unfortunately, at the moment, in the self-actualizations. And what I would love to see is the belief and connection to nature being part of our bottom, most important Maslow's hierarchy of needs. That's my goal eventually, to turn Maslow on its head and have environment right down there with safety. So the foundation has been working, Foundation's been working on a range of issues to do with mental health, but which we call elemental health, and looking at what actually happens to people when they spend time in nature and the natural world. We're looking at how we can create connections between people and how we connect connections with nature. And we're looking at how our programs can actually see humanity and nature not in a separate dichotomy, but to see it as an integrated and interrelated process. As we all know, as we moved from an evolutionary process from hunter-gatherers, we came into Cartesian models of where we and nature became separate. And I think at that stage, when we and nature became separate, much of our mental health and our social issues have slowly started to come up to the fore. We are not separate from nature. We are part of nature. And nature is not there just for our human use. Nature is there for its own integrity as well. So just a quick swoop through some of our projects. This is just a flash of what we're doing. We're working on environmental sustainability and climate change at the moment. We work with a lot of young people who come and play, who come and spend time and get muddy and dirty, which is exactly what children should be doing. And we're also working with young people with special education needs and development who come for deep sensory engagement in nature with us. And we work with over 6,000 school children on an average year. We don't have our children now, who come and do a range of environmental practices and pond dipping, but a lot of nature play. We look at some of the art and ways that you can actually bring people and nature together. There's a lot of research around fractal patterns and how this affects our brain neurology. A piece of work that the foundation is very interested in at the moment is on the neuroscience of nature. We work with extremely complex youth at risk. This is a group of children who come to us, 13 to 15-year-olds, who actually at the end of their projects are seeing a 71% increase in their return to school and school engagement. They come to us pretty disconnected. That's the staff looking disconnected as well, I hate to say. But hopefully over time and with deep facilitation and of learning to communicate and express themselves and be able to share vulnerability deep within woodland and nature settings, we have an outcome that leads to something along awe and wonder, a calm, a manage of mood control, and an ability to have hope for the future. Turnaround is our main wilderness therapy program that we've run for the last 14 years. This is a project that takes very challenging 16 to 21-year-olds, some coming out of the police and prison services, to young people with extreme mental health issues, to young people who have been suffering with extraordinary trauma through their lives. I mean, I love this picture. I don't know why I put it up and show people, but it actually makes me laugh. I think this was about 1 o'clock in the morning on a wilderness journey. It got better after that, I just want to assure you. So we've also been doing this kind of very important work with Essex University. And so the whole way through a program like this around wilderness therapy and behavior change, we're measuring all the time what actually happens to our young people and how they are changing. So we then, the whole program has 2 deep immersion wilderness journeys. This is up at Sylvan on the west coast of Scotland. Self-supported wilderness journeys, working as a small community with no access to the outside. We've also done some very long backpacking journeys. This is on the Isle of Mull, coming up for winter, so dark by nearly 4 o'clock, but one of the most extraordinary journeys we've done. We've worked up in the hills of Perthshire, and we've done some extremely other activities, more along adventure therapy than wilderness therapy, but this was climbing up on the Via Ferrata in the Pyrenees. And then later that year, that same group who'd been in the Pyrenees then did an extended sea kayaking journey around the coast of Menorca and the Biosphere Reserve. We work in all weathers, snowshoeing in the Pyrenees to the most extraordinary weather, as you can see in Menorca. Our practice, what is it about we do that makes a difference to people's mental health and connect them to nature? So from a psychological point of view, we work in a very person-centered approach. We're very gentle. We offer extraordinary role modeling. When we come to problems, we have a team who are willing to work in a very egalitarian, very humanistic way with children and young people and share our own vulnerabilities as well as our own strengths. We work with a methodology called the Circle of Courage, and this is embedded into all of our work the whole way through. And in this, we can also put in an environmental advocacy. We can talk about belonging to the earth as part of belonging. We can talk about skills of looking after the natural world and growing responsibility. And we can learn about how we can function well with the natural world on our own. And generosity is about giving back, either socially or environmentally. And most importantly, we build resilience. We build the ability to know that we can cope and that we can manage and we can survive through whatever people and the world throws at us. We build a community. We have a strong community around our young people of volunteer mentors who come and give their time and energy to support them in their journey of change. And we give one-to-one attention. And we tie this into things like the World Economic Forum. And I can promise you that the 2020 top skills for employability, as mentioned at the World Economic Forum, are exactly skills that our young people come out with after their years of wilderness engagement with us. Emotional intelligence, cognitive flexibility, all of these big words are things that if we look at them really carefully, we're providing all of that just by time in the wilderness. And most importantly, all of our young people, anyone who comes through our doors, is trained and taught leave no trace ethics. We also do pro-environmental behaviors, we do litter picks, we do tree planting. And when you look at environmental education, it usually starts in 3 concentric circles with the self, the other, and then the environment. And we certainly bring all 3 of those together. So the science behind it is interesting. I'm sure many of you have now started to explore the work around forest bathing, Shirin-yoku in Japan. There's been some extraordinary work coming out of the impact of forests on our brain neurology. I talked earlier around the fractal patternings on the neuroscience of the brain and how it actually calms the brain. It goes back to where we, in our evolutionary process of being used to being in repetitive pattern systems. Forest bathing has started to get some very serious science behind it. Of course, all of the science needs more work and more focus. But just for example, looking at some of the physiological outcomes and looking at men with high blood pressure, walking for 35 minutes for 4 sessions of that in forest had proven outcomes around decreases in blood pressure, adrenaline, cortisol, and the narrative was about feeling natural and relaxed. And women had a control study done against the previous day and the day that they were in the forest, again showing much more decrease in their cortisol levels. We've also been looking at cortisol levels as well of when you just think about nature. There's some very interesting research now that sometimes just remembering a place that you felt good was going to bring out the same kind of outcomes for you in terms of your cortisol levels dropping. Some other very interesting work that came out, and it's still something I have a lot of interest in, is attention restoration therapy, which was brought out by the Kaplans some time ago. And if you imagine, so much of our over-busy, over-directed world is around screens, about outcomes, about timescales. We have what's called very, very focused, directed attention. And the brain doesn't have time to restore its creativity and its ability to cope. What the Kaplans did in their research was to look, and there's a lot of this research, and I'm happy to share some of this with anyone who's interested, was something called soft fascination. There's something about being in the natural world, and all of us on this conference would have experienced that together, is that kind of feeling of being able to be small in a big environment, to being away from our normal problems, and to look at the world through kind of a lens that's soft with no demand on us. So that directed attention is actually softened. And by that happening, we have some significant neurological changes, and it also helps really increase our creativity and our ability to feel differently. And they found that the 3 big outcomes in this work are around mental fatigue and stress recovery and ADHD. And I think that there's scope for some more work to be done about PTSD and some other major traumas. So there's also been this whole question of awe and wonder, which soft fascination and the work of attention restoration therapy ties into, but there's some really significant work now about what it is about awe and wonder. It can actually happen to me in a garden, just looking at the most beautiful flower. I can have a whole physiological change at the beauty of nature, or the wonder of big mountains, or the sound of a river. These are all things that bring around an emotional and then physiological change in our bodies. And there's a whole lot of text here around some Dutch mapping that was done by Michiel van Elk. And it was looking at what actually does awe and wonder offer us as human beings. And it stops us ruminating, worrying about our problems and going round and round and round. It gives us generosity. It gives us a connection to others. One of the interesting things is it talks about a sense of self-transcendence. It talks about the fact that our egos become less overwhelming, that we're able to actually engage better with other people, and be less self-aware, less self-focused. So when I look at a lot of the mental health clients that I will deal with, I see them, because of what they're dealing with, incredibly self-absorbed. And I don't say that in a negative way. It's just the way that things are. And actually, if nature is able to help them be less self-absorbed, to see themselves as part of something bigger, it actually helps some of that stress and vulnerability dissipate, and it gives a sense of connection and a sense of attachment. So even things like people who drew themselves with an awe and wonder experience drew themselves as much smaller than they did when they weren't there in the control groups. So I think part of the problem of our relationship with the earth is a sense of human omnipotence, the fact that we are not vulnerable enough, and that we've lost contact with the fact that the survival of the planet is linked to our own survival, and that we are not the predeterminant of all of that. Some of the other science that's come in has been around reflection. We've been measuring what actually happens when people spend time and be still. Often this is a narrative research, but for example, this is a quote After doing this course, nature now means everything to me. I find it therapeutic. It helps my mind become clear of worries. While being in town, these worries keep building up. And we actually facilitate a lot of our work, and a lot of our narrative and our research is actually through pictures and drawings, where our clients are actually able to express themselves through nature-based art, and through filling in different kinds of facilitated questionnaires behind it. Here, a young person has written a poem from one of our programs in Scotland: lost in silence, staring beneath the water, seeing life under the running water, hearing the wind, the geese, the world, lost in glorious peace. This is a young 15-year-old up in Glenlivet in the north of Scotland on trail. We also are looking at the science of pro-social behaviors. Much of our wilderness trail journeys, and as we all know, as wilderness people, we need each other often in the wilderness. Sometimes it's lovely to be on our own, but we're teaching pro-social behaviors through our nature engagement. We're looking at eating together, of sharing meals, of actually coming back into almost a tribal community that is socially interdependent and with a high functioning social agenda. And we also look at gratitude, we look at celebration, we do massive amounts of community coming around children who do well through our programs and children who don't do so well through our programs. We come around everybody to celebrate their kind of rebirthing themselves from their issues, but also a close attachment to the earth. So there's a lot of research on this. There's a slide here which has got a whole range of the different kinds of research, going back to Ulrich, who looked at physical and medical healing through just having images of wild nature from your hospital bed, etc. So there's a lot of this work ticking. We need to do a lot more about it. Very, very quickly, because my time is running out, these are some of the science backup that we've done through peer-reviewed research, showing the different changes through the wilderness experiences, and also the big, most significant piece of work that we found is that the more connected these young people were to nature, the more the outcomes around their mood and around their self-esteem. So the changes there, and looking at stress levels and looking at a range of hopefulness. I've been following a lot of Keith Russell's work around hopefulness. At the moment, I have to work hard on my own hopefulness because I seem to carry the weight of young people's struggles and mental health sometimes, and then I listen to programs about Romania and that talk, and I feel a sense of heaviness sometimes around the environment. So hopefulness is important. If we can feel hopeful, we've got energy to keep going, and it's very, very important, and we see this coming out of our wilderness programs in our young people. It goes back to frontiers. I don't think it was a bad result. It was actually a good result. And I'm just going to keep, this was very important on well-being, which looked at well-being and in comparison to the UK as well. So our work is around mental health and well-being, but it's very closely linked to environmental health and well-being. And we cannot see the two in separation. We have to see them together. Thank you very much for having me. I had to rush through quite a lot of my slides, and if anybody would like to talk more or find more information, please do get in touch. My email is at the bottom of my screen. So I've got to work out how to get back. Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you, Joe. Very interesting presentation. Yeah, I think a lot of people are interested in this topic, what wilderness can do to people and how we can bridge this disconnect from wilderness. Yeah, we already have several questions. So we have Irina asking what your best instrument or tip is to deal with teenagers that might not always be easy to work with.
Oh, you know, I think, and don't get me wrong when I say this, I think that teenagers can smell in the air, whether you like them or not. So I think that we, It's our animal instinct. I think we are very loving and open towards everything that comes towards us. And I think we're very funny, we're very silly, we laugh a lot, while we do some very serious work at the same time. And so I think if you're working with teenagers who are not engaging so well, it's about finding the little golden thread of an interest for them and then working with that and making sure that while we're doing the more important work, we do keep them smiling and laughing. And when they're crying and they're sad, we make space for that too. But you've got to be very quick on your feet and engaging and loving and kind. And we work with human kindness as one of our most valuable tools.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's always a good rule. Yeah, we have Tim asking, I think, a very timely question. He's referring to the National Trusts Act and that underrepresented and disenfranchised groups are also underrepresented in wilderness. And what do you think can be done about this?
Yeah, I think it's a very big problem. And I think that unfortunately, a lot of funding for outdoor education has been dropped from an awful lot of budgets across the world. It's not been given the relevance it's needed. And I think those outdoor education centers were really important on bringing children from a wide range of backgrounds into contact with nature. I don't think the purpose was a connection to nature. I think it was using nature for adventure, but it still gave them that initial introduction to the natural world. I think that we are working with very underrepresented children, and we're actually working in Scotland now with a new project called Agatroon, which is working with young people from inner cities and disadvantaged communities with mental health. I think it's very important that we work with absolutely everyone. So we're actually working with students like Eton College, which is probably the most elite school in Britain, who go on our South African wilderness journeys with Simon King's group and Duncan, who was speaking earlier, to actually working with young people in Wales and Scotland who've come from abject poverty. And we get children here at our centre who arrive with their trousers too short and shoes with holes, and we're going to be outdoors in the wind and the rain, and they've got only a small t-shirt on. So, you know, we dealing with all angles of this, but I think it's through the schools. We absolutely have to have more school engagement because the schools can actually encourage and engage a wide continuum of children to take access into outdoor education.
Yeah, thank you for that answer. I think everyone can agree that the funding by public institutions is crucial to allow everyone to experience this. Then we have another question from Timothy. He would like to know where in the UK you're based and how people can get involved with what you do.
Okay, so our main headquarters are in Essex, quite close to Stansted Airport. We're about 20 minutes drive. We're on a large 400-acre farm, and we have a 100-acre beautiful woodland, just 5 minutes drive and a good walk from here. And we work quite extensively across Scotland and currently looking at opening up some more work in the Midlands, close to Leicestershire. So do get in touch, Tim, and you know, if we can find some way of meeting or finding something, a way of engaging, do let us know. We have actually built, we've actually built an association of outdoor therapists that's growing rapidly at the moment, which we're looking now to become a more accredited, and that's therapists across the whole of the UK. So we do referrals of clients to wherever those therapists are, but we're actually doing the training of wilderness therapy, and we're actually doing the training of how to actually manage clients outside. So we've done theoretical training and practical training. And actually most of that has been, thank you, Europe, up in your beautiful mountains in Poland and Czech Republic and Slovakia.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, we have answered all questions and we're just in time. So maybe just a last information where people can find all information. And then we head into the next presentation.
Okay. So it's on my website, I think. It's wildernessfoundation.org.uk, org.uk. And emails to me can come to jo@. Thank you.
Okay, then thank you very much, Jo.
Thank you.